My name is Richard Malloy, and this is my program for doing the calculations using functions when reading in from a CSV file. At the very start of my code, I have my function prototypes for calculating all of the answers. I have one for finding the average, finding the highest value, the lowest value, and the year with the highest cumulative rainfall. I use all void functions as at the end of the function, I would just calculate the answer and then print it. So then all I had to do was call the function from within inside the main. In each function, I have called in my array for my num, which is my values of rainfall. This is in all of them. For some of them, I brought in the array for the year, as I had to display the year as well. And then again, in all of them, I had brought in my value for the size of the array, just so that it would be more usable if I were to have to change my code for a different CSV file. Inside of my main, I have the declarations for any of the arrays I was needing, for the header, for the values of the rainfall, and the dates at which that they happened. I also have a declaration for a counter and for the size of the arrays for when needing to use that through counting. Then I had opened and read in the values from the file. There is an if and else, so that if the file was not empty, it would follow through and read the values from it, and if it was empty, it would then print an error message. When reading in the values, there was scanning in from a file, and then I would scan in the header, and then separately with a for loop, going from placement 0 to placement of the size of the array, it would then scan in values for the year and for the value of the rainfall, going increments of 1 as it would go placement 0, and then read the value for that, and then placement 1, and so on. And then the file is closed. At the end of main, I just have my calling function. I'm just calling the functions at the end of the main. So I'm calling my average, my highest value, my lowest value, and then the cumulative value. And then I have return 0. For my first function, for finding the average, I have my declarations for my sum, my average, and a counter. I have a for loop starting from 0 and going to the size, which I've set as 767, as this is the amount of placements in the array there will be, going from 0 to 767. That's 768 places for values. It'll be going in increments of 1. To calculate the sum, I have sum equal to sum plus the number currently being read. So then it will go sum plus placement 0 of the array, and placement 0 will then be sum, so that'll be placement 0 plus placement 1, then placement 0 and 1 plus placement 2 all the way to the end. And then outside of this loop, I'm calculating the average, so I have the average is equal to the sum divided by size plus 1, because it's the amount of actual places or actual numbers in the array. And then I am just printing the value to 2 decimal places, as in the file that we were given, the highest decimal place value of the rainfall was to 2 decimal places, so this is just for maximum accuracy. For my second function, for finding the highest value, I have my declarations for a counter, a variable for the highest month, and the highest value. I start off with a for loop counting from 0 to the size of the array that I've set as 767, and then going in increments of 1. Inside of this loop, I have an if statement that will check if the number that's currently being read is bigger than my assigned value to highest value, which is currently 0. So it will always be checking if the newer value is bigger than the value currently set in the highest value. If the number currently being read is bigger, then the highest value is then rewritten as the number being read, and then the highest month or the date that it is found in will also be recorded using the same counter as year and square brackets with an I. So it'll measure the placement where in the array I've found the highest value so far. So then I'll be able to tell the date at which the highest value was recorded. If it is not true, I have an else statement. So then the highest value will just remain the same, as will the highest month. At the end of this, I just have my print. So I'll be printing the highest value to 2 decimal places for maximum accuracy. And then I'll also have the month with the highest value, where I print it dividing the number by 100 and rounding it to 2 decimal places so that it prints using the months in a decimal form and the year as a whole number. For my next function, for finding the lowest value, I have my declarations for a counter, a variable for lowest month, and the lowest value. I had started off my lowest value as the 0 placement of my values being read in, so that I would know in case I set it at 0, then nothing would be lower than 0 in the file. So I'd set it to placement 0 so that it's guaranteed to have something lower than it, unless placement 0 is the lowest. I have a for loop that is counting from the placement 0 to the size again of 767 in increments of 1. I have an if statement that is then checking if the number currently being read is now lower than the lowest value, which is currently at the very start set to the first value of the array. And then if this is true, then the lowest value is now rewritten as the value being read, and the lowest month as the month of the same placement. And again, if it is false, then they just remain the same. I then check, because in testing I had found there are 2 months with the same lowest value, so I had reset my I, and then I have another for loop going from 0 to the size again, checking again. But in this, I have an if statement seeing if any number being read is equal to my lowest value, which has already been found to be the lowest value. And then there is another one found through testing, and then I found this, and then I then go to print it using the loop, so it will then read 2 values equal to my lowest value, and it will then print my lowest value to 2 decimal places for accuracy, and it'll print the month where I divide the date by 100 and round to 2 decimal places again, just so the month is in fractions, or is in decimal place, and the year is in whole numbers, and it'll be printing 2 years with the same value. For my final function of finding the year with the highest accumulative rainfall, I have declarations for counters, for sum, and variables such as my current year, highest year, and the highest value. I'd use the while loop that is starting on 0 and going to the size as I said at 767. And then in this, I have my current year set to the first placement of the year that is being read in, and my sum is being reset to 0 within this loop, as I will be going to count in increments of 12 before this loop reloops again. So the sum will need to be reset as this increment in 12 counts up the year sum, and then we'll need to reset the sum. So for this, I've done a for loop going from 0 to 12 in increments of 1, where it would get the sum and then add it to the number being read from that. So it'll go placement 0 and then add placement 1 to that, and then add placement 2 to that up until placement 11, which will be the 12 months. I then have an if loop to see an if statement to see if the sum is larger than my highest value, which is being calculated. And if this is the case, then highest value is then equal to the sum. Highest year is equal to the current year that it's reading. And then at the end of that, I just print off to 0 decimal places after dividing the year by 100, just so that it would only print the year and not what month it was, because that doesn't matter. This is what you see when you run my code. So it displays it using the parts for A, B, C, and D in formatting, and then it says so A is the overall average, and it gives that as 63.39 millimeters. B was the highest, so it says highest value is 217, and that happened in 1978 in December. And the lowest value has 3.6 millimeters that appeared twice, both in 1986 and 1991, and then gives the month and all that as well. And then finally is the year with the highest accumulated rainfall, which is then found to be 2002.